Welcome to this insightful episode of the Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast, where we dive into the intricacies of compliance and IT security in the nonprofit sector and beyond during the pandemic. Join hosts Andreas, Wieman, and Tim Keefe, with our special guest, Dan Hernandez, CEO and founder of PCS Technology, as they explore critical issues facing organizations today.
Hey everybody, welcome to another exciting edition of the Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast. I'm here with my co-host Tim Keefe, and Tim, you want to introduce our guest today?
Oh yeah, great. Thanks, Andreas. So we're really excited today to have gentleman Dan Hernandez. Dan and I have known each other for quite a few years. We're both board members, an amazing not-for-profit here in San Francisco. We can talk about that on a separate podcast. But Dan's here today, really talking about, I think, there's a pretty important concept or need that especially happened over the pandemic. So what I want to do is kind of get into this whole idea of, what is compliance? And, Dan, maybe I can turn that over to you to maybe ask you, what's your definition of compliance with the type of work that you and your team do for your clients?
Thanks, Tim. Well, Dan Hernandez, the CEO, founder of PCS Technologies here in San Francisco, and we currently support 40 plus nonprofits in the San Francisco Bay Area, as well as a lot of other for-profit organizations as well, attorneys, general contractors, etc. And so over the last several years, compliance has been a big conversation. Just working with some pretty good sized nonprofits, over 100 employees. The city and county of San Francisco has really started to crack down on nonprofits to make sure that they're compliant. So what does that mean? So if you're working with the San Francisco Health Plan, the San Francisco Department of Health, they're holding you to a higher standard of IT in order to protect that personal information, personal health information. And in order to do that, these nonprofits are required to become HIPAA compliant. So that's one level of compliance that they need to be able to follow. And basically, it's not just following to be HIPAA compliant, but you actually have to do what they're asking you to do. And you have to be able to show and actually do what they're asking you to do. And most importantly, you have to be able to prove that you're doing what they're telling you to do. So having a level of IT where you can track things simple as onboarding new staff, offboarding new staff, making sure that you're giving them the right permissions to access different levels of data, and then also making sure that all your devices and users are in the system and tracked so that you have a reporting system.
So Dan, I would imagine that that's gotten really interesting, especially during the pandemic when everybody scattered to the home. And then even before that, I remember when I was doing IT work in the 2010, 2015 timeframe, everybody got real excited about bring your own device. So what does that mean from a compliance perspective?
Well, it's made it more complicated for sure. Just having people all around the country and even around the world today, and being able to make sure that, not everybody's behind a corporate firewall anymore, right? So back in the day, we were all behind the same four walls. We had a big corporate firewall, and that really protected us from cybersecurity issues, things like that. But now today that people are working from home, could be on just a little AT&T router, with public access, things like that. Who knows how they're set up, right? There's no way to control that. So What we do is we have tools that we put in place that's an advanced endpoint protection that's monitored 24/7 by a security operations center called a SOC. And then also having ways of defending attacks on those devices, utilizing EDR, SIM, and these are technical terms, but they're simple tools that can be deployed by an IT firm or an organization that has a higher level of compliance. So we're using these tools to protect these devices. And then as far as bring your own device, that's another area that's really sticky. because if it's your own personal device, how do we know how it's being protected? So
Right.
then we have to make sure that we have things in place like multi-factor authentication, and that's going to an authenticator app, not just SMS or simple ways of authenticating. So then that way we know who's actually logging into systems, and it's a little higher level of security.
Very cool. Andreas, you look like you're going to ask
Yeah.
a question there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, well, one, you stole the question that I was going to ask Dan, so kudos on that.
That's because you told me ahead of time. That's why I threw it in there. Made me sound more intelligent than you for a change.
Yeah, lesson learned. You're right. But no, in all seriousness, I see it the same way, and the level of exposure that I have is more, end user, frontline user perspective. And so, as you guys were talking about virtualization during the pandemic, even pre-pandemic, BYOD, and all of these other, what I would just say, openness to exposure. But one of the things that I've seen is these nefarious they I use the adjective resilient. That's probably not the best adjective to use for someone that's doing something bad, but they got really clever. And so if you think about end users, Dan, and not just looking at it from a cybersecurity or infosec perspective, because it's a very finite amount of people that make or break the business, frankly. I think I'm going to go on record and say I think the cybersecurity teams, IT in general, is probably one of the less appreciated groups in a lot of companies.
Yeah.
I don't think they get the prominence they should. The second, knowing what they do in the background. The second is, and I think you mentioned it, like SIM swaps on mobile phones, for example, for BYODs, and these smishing attempts and phishing attempts where they're skinning these emails to look like they're from companies and spoofing email addresses with subtle, a period here, a period there, or something like that to make it look official. And then these end users are like, oh, well, I better, respond to this email so my access doesn't get cut or something like that. And lo and behold, what they're actually doing is sharing their credentials, their logins, right? So have you seen, well, I guess one question then with that, what would you suggest to educate frontline users or any users that have credentials, and knowing there should be certain levels of data access depending on the level of the credentials, right? What would you suggest or recommend to organizations, for profit or nonprofit, to help educate frontline employees to be, one, just more aware of the nefarious actors that are out there, and be a little bit more preventative, so that way it's not all just coming back up to cybersecurity teams trying to solve world hunger?
Yeah, there's a lot of good points there. One is constantly having to train your team. So at the very minimum, you need to be doing security awareness training annually. And that does check a box of compliance for your cybersecurity insurance and for HIPAA, et cetera, other types of levels of compliance. So it's actually necessary to make sure you get 100% participation in some type of training where people learn how to hover over an email address, how to hover over a link, do this really basic things. But I guess you wouldn't be surprised, people are easily fooled with these scams. And it's really unfortunate, some of the things we see where people do get phished, and then the hackers are really smart, as you said. They have gotten really sophisticated where they just monitor email accounts. They don't do anything. They don't send spam. They don't, there's really no way of knowing there's somebody in your system until they see an opportunity to scam you out of $100,000 or, redirect an invoice or a payment from a client and or a vendor. So it's not only needing to protect your own industry, it's like, how protected are your vendors?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of issues there. So training is really important. And then we also have advanced tools to monitor email systems, Google and or Microsoft, where our system will scan and eliminate most phishing emails. And then also, if somebody gets phished, we will know that there's a login from a unknown area. You know, if you're
Mhm.
living in San Francisco and someone logs into your account in New York 20 minutes later, we know that's not feasible travel. So then we would, be aware of that within minutes with our system
Mhm.
alerting. So it's really important to pay attention to your IT.
Yeah, it's funny because we're we're probably like the biggest problem child I could think of, at least from our business model, where not even a lot of employees, but actually a lot of contractors. Think of us like the almost like a movie business where, as a film comes together, you often are bringing the film crew together based on the unique requirements of the film. It could be, I'm a sci-fi film, so I got a bunch of CGI, so I hire Industrial Light and Magic or some CGI house or whatever. And then at the end of the movie, they all scatter. You're not on your team, but they're project based conglomerations, for lack of a better term, or organizations. So I think about us, here at Transform CX, and this is actually the lunch we had a couple of weeks ago was like a kick in the pants for me to go, yeah, I need to start thinking about this. We get caught up in business development, we get caught up in all the fun stuff. We got to pay attention to the plumbing. So thinking about that, what are the things that you would say are the top things to any organization? Like if you were consulting with me and saying, well, geez, Tim, you've got this company and you contract with 15 other companies based on the needs of a particular project. That might be 10 people. It might be 100 people for that project. It might be 3 months. It might be 5 years. What would you say are the top 5 things or you would come to mind and say, holy crap, Tim, you got to be thinking about these?
The basics. It's I've been in IT so long, it used to be called data processing. So a lot of the basic things haven't changed. So for your cloud applications, you've got to make sure you have some type of SaaS backup so that Office 365, Google, email, et cetera, is all backed up to the cloud with separate credentials, et cetera. So if you ever had an incident where email got encrypted or there's a problem, we do have a backup. The other thing is making sure you have MFA turned on at all levels for any and all accounts you can, especially Salesforce. I've seen large installations of Salesforce where they have no MFA, and it would be really easy to get into that account. I've seen Salesforce applications not being backed up, so making sure that you have some of these basics in play, and then utilize some simple tools that will monitor your email, monitor your devices, and then also we implement a concept called zero trust. So it's no longer just waiting for an attack to your system, but we have a system that learns what you're able to do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And then we ring fence those applications so that nothing else is allowed. And that zero trust concept has been something that saved a lot of my clients from ransomware attacks and other types of attacks. So we use several different layers of security to protect people and their identities.
That's really good. Makes me think I need to sit down with you and do a statement of work here pretty quickly. But no, I mean,
Tim,
go ahead, Andreas.
I think the other thing is, and Dan, keep me honest on this aspect of cybersecurity and safety, but I don't think you should have all your passwords and IDs on a post-it note on your monitor, Tim. So
what are you talking about?
I keep mine under the keyboard so that no one can see them.
But I write them backwards so nobody can interpret them. They're coded. They're coded.
That's an excellent point. So passwords is one of the things we see most in when we do a third-party level 1 risk assessment. We find that users are saving all their passwords in Google Chrome, and or we'll find a spreadsheet on the system with passwords in it, things like that, and it's really a big conversation I have almost with every client. Well, with every client and every prospect we have, is that we need to talk about some password hygiene and make sure that you're utilizing a password manager. So a password manager, one, will keep your data safe because Google Chrome and these browsers are easily hackable. And two, it actually makes your life easier because you only have to remember one passphrase. And then for myself, I have my password manager on the desktop, on my laptop, my iPhone, my iPad. So all I have to remember is one passphrase, and all my passwords just pop up when I need them.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. Well, Dan, I think you're hitting on a topic that's probably worth even deeper dives at future sessions, because I'd love to, as we think about this, and I was a CIO many, many years ago, and one of the things as a CIO, that was one of your jobs, right? Which is to make sure that you had some of the structure in place, that you were doing audits, et cetera. And I think the downside of all these cloud applications has been the CIO has gone away, particularly in the small and mid-sized organizations. It's like, well, somebody over in marketing can order HubSpot, with a credit card. Then I've got Salesforce over here in sales, and I've got Zoho in my operations team, or any number of applications, which for us as a business has been good, because one of our things is to help optimize those complex environments. But I think the work that you and your team does is, as you said earlier, Andreas, the unsung heroes of the organization, right? Which is the traditional help desk, which it's like a cop, right? Nobody likes cops until you need a cop. Everybody, but I think there's this kind of resurrection, or we need to reinforce this to organizations that, especially, you brought up ransomware, and oh my God, it's like everybody's getting hit with it. And, it's not just big guys. It's not just cities and banks and, billion-dollar companies. It's the library, right? We locked out all your access to the library. Give us $20,000 or you're out of business. So, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that's happening all day, every day. So, any thoughts you'd like to leave us with as we close out? Because I'd love to have you. We're going to definitely have you back, Dan. I could see you as a regular part of this.
Well, thanks, Tim. I think, one thing that we're doing for our clients and our prospects is performing a risk assessment, having a 30-minute conversation on, understanding what your risks are, and even performing a very simple vulnerability scan so that you can understand what these risks are. And so you need to be asking these questions. As a CEO of an organization, CFO, it's your responsibility to make sure that your data is protected. And so having just a simple conversation with an expert in this area is important, so that, at the CEO level, you understand what type of risks you're taking. That's where it starts.
That's great. Really important. Hey, Dan, I can't thank you enough for getting up early on a Sunday morning. Let's not do this again. Whoever's idea that was, we just need to fire that guy. Andreas, anything else would you like to end with here?
No, I think Dan hit on some crucially important points that, especially at the end there. It starts with the owner of the organization, right, and CEO in a lot of cases. And I think the education path and just providing that level of awareness throughout the organization, we're leaning more into data-driven decision making and data prominence. But at the end of the day, the level of exposure and in the, I guess, the value of that data, like you just said, the public library, scenario there's like, you're sitting on a digital gold mine of data there. And in my mind, it all starts and ends with folks like Dan and their organizations and putting up the Fort Knox around protecting that data. And I think more and more as, Gen AI proliferates and matures and goes through iteration cycles, and everyone starts understanding the level of importance that this data holds, you're going to start getting, I'm hoping organizations get a little bit more serious and start reaching out to folks like Dan to solidify and protect that. So just appreciate you taking time to be with us, Dan.
Oh, thank you, Andreas. I really appreciate being here, and I love the conversation. Anytime you want me back, I'll be happy to come back.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dan. You have a great one. And for everybody else, thanks again for listening. This is Tim Keefe and Andreas Wieman and Dan Hernandez with another Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast. Really appreciate it, everybody.